Hey everybody. So I just wanted to get on here. One, happy Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth. And I know this is an interesting day. We got Juneteenth as a federal holiday after all the outpouring of support and resistance in relation to George Floyd's murder, Breonna Taylor's as well. Instead of just getting people to stop killing us. Um, Thank you. And then Juneteenth, of course, we're celebrating the full legal enforcement of emancipation from chattel slavery, especially in Texas in 1867. And this is just food for thought so that you do know. It was not that black people in Texas were simply like, oh, late to the party. And I know that's kind of a joke sometimes black people make. And I have been guilty at times of maybe chuckling when people said that. But what needs to be understood is that, you know, the Civil War was fought because white people intended to continue to enslave black people, right? And I say white people because even though only 4% of Americans ever owned slaves, white men in particular who were poor still supported the institution of slavery because they believed in it and they wanted to be able to partake in it to get rich, right? And if you want documentation, because whenever black people start talking about his people want all this proof, look at Chandra Manning's What This Cruel War Was Over. All right, so I say that to say happy Juneteenth, even though I kind of feel a way about people getting time and a half on a day black people were supposed to be freed. So if you're black and going to work, don't feel bad. Get that time and a half because this is a way to try to placate us and act like we too stupid to figure it out. Anyway, in the name of freedom, one of the things that most black people wanted after slavery was one true aspect of freedom, which is freedom of the mind, the right to know, the right to read and learn. Um, so here I go. Back my black a free black women's library challenge, and I read other stuff. I have a separate list of other stuff I've read that isn't by black women, but I just want to kind of keep going with this. So I just finished a book called "A Terrible Thing to Waste." Environmental Racism and Its Assault on the American Mind by Harriet A. Washington, who is an author that I have really admired for some time. She is a historian, a medical historian, a historian of science. And I think it's important when we read Black women scholars like this in particular. One, because I didn't know even that there was a subgroup of history called the history of science until I was at Spelman when I was introduced to her work, Medical Apartheid. And I had never heard of this. And this is a way that when we talk about STEM, as I go into the details of the book, and people are always saying, oh, yeah, science, technology, engineering, math, all those things. And I'm not saying they're not important, but what I am saying is the formulaic, robotic nature of those fields, as far as I'm concerned, are no good without an understanding of philosophical ethics, understanding the history of how they've been exploited, particularly to hurt different groups of people, and especially in our case, African Americans. So I think even reading this kind of book, one which is incredibly thorough, impressively thorough, and recent. And she actually has even a new intro that's updated for COVID-19 because she actually published this in 2019. COVID came in 2020. And a lot of the things that she brought attention to actually blew my mind. So she begins talking about, um, how lead is the only thing that can enter the body into which there is no cure. Doctors have not found it. So things that were like, um, people were still using lead paint way after it was supposed to be considered illegal by the government, especially in places like Baltimore. So, like a baby can be crawling around and have their hand on the wall, like babies and toddlers do. And you put it in your mouth and you're infected by lead. And they call these quote unquote lead babies in Baltimore, where I am now. And what it does is it retards the growth of the brain and it makes it slower to process visual processing to be able to keep up what normalized learning looks like. So she is looking at this through a scientific perspective and analyzing it all the way through. And as I read it, and it's a heavy read. It's a heavy read because of the reality of it. And I'm thinking to myself, that alone, she was just looking at these case studies, I think between 2007, 2008, up to 2015. That alone had thousands of children in Baltimore who got payouts for being infected by lead. But these are not payouts that people can just live on for the rest of their life. These were things to get their kids the medical kind of help to support their development and education. And Black people historically have been denied education. And even when we have it, particularly not good education that teaches us we're invisible, education where, our children are punished profusely. And as an educator, I'm aware of that. And I was thinking to myself, so here we have the law, which is constantly policing our kids in school. We don't have a history of access to good libraries, right? That are well resourced. Public school teachers are overworked, under resourced, underpaid, and all those things play into it. And then you add the scientific element that people actively are dumping waste in our communities. Cancer Alley in Louisiana, the Baltimore lead babies, and this is the case in Flint. This is the case in New York, parts of the Bronx, Harlem. They're always in African American places. And she makes the point throughout this book, and I really encourage you all to read it, because she makes the point throughout this book. This people often jump to the class thing. It's not the class thing. She was like in poor African American neighborhoods, middle class African American neighborhoods, and she had statistics and everything to back this shit up from multiple places, that the government will actively allow these dumping waste sites, which help retard the growth, which can also, and I know people say, oh, you're not supposed to use the word retarded anymore. Retarded means to slow down. Okay? That's what it means. All right? We're not talking about individuals. Let's. Anyway, so what it does is it even infects things like lead, the inhalation of lead, things that can be in your water as far as lead goes, affects the development of your baby's brain. That means, and she makes the point, she makes it clear, 87% of an infant's energy goes to the development of the brain, which means when your child is sick, and God forbid, sick with pesticides and things like that are unhealthy, they can't do both. They're an infant, and that's why it's so dangerous. So a lot of times we're hearing about what I think is the increase of diagnosis of autism. And this is across the board, though. Learning difficulties, learning differences, and it has everything to do with our environment. And I remember one of my friends who went to Howard, and I went to Spelman. And I remember she said maybe around our sophomore year, we had gone to high school together, our sophomore year, whatever. She was like, Salah, I think that environmental justice is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And I remember listening to her, and she was, she was kind of like the earthy chick, and I was just like, okay. And I was listening, but I didn't really get it. I knew she knew she was talking about, but I was like, okay, and now I realize why this is so critical. Freddie Gray, we all know who was murdered in Baltimore, and it led to the rebellion in Baltimore against the police. Also victim of these other environmental factors. And the way she starts out the book, though, and I actually get shocked sometimes when I'm in class and kids don't know who this is. She starts out the book with Johnny Cochran. And, people, if you're millennials, you know Johnny Cochran's name from the time you grew up, because he did the O.J. Simpson case, got Diddy off. And that may be what you know. But, I mean, he was a big lawyer even before O.J., which is why he was brought on. But he was always dealing with race and the law, so on and so forth. Critical race theory. Now, see, Johnny Cochran is a critical race theorist. He understands how race and the law combine with one another. Anyway, she starts it off when they talk about the death of Johnny Cochran. I remember the death of Johnny Cochran, hearing about it and just being crushed as a teenager, because he was somebody I admired. And we know he had issues with women, but he was somebody, once again, I'm just going to put this out there in case somebody want to come in the comments and say, well, he was abusive to his first wife. He was. It was in court records. He's also one of those people, rare people, like I talked about Tretch in Naughty by Nature, who actually got the counseling, went to work on himself to be better so he did not become that kind of man. Now that does not reduce the trauma of his first wife. So I just want to make sure I'm not glossy over the experiences of black women. Okay, I'm not doing that. But that there is, to me, room for forgiveness when you do the right thing. But anyway, I say that to say, Johnny Cochran is a wonderful man, and I still admire him, even from afar. But she starts with a case in Anniston, Alabama. Hell, I had never heard of that place. Looked it up. It ain't far from Huntsville. Come back, group. Maybe y'all should do something about this. Maybe y'all can find something to come around with this. Okay, sorry. So anyway, Anniston, Alabama, where they had basically been dumping these sites, develop low brain development of black babies, killing infant mortality. So we're already talking about poor health care for black people. He was fighting a case to prove that this was racial injustice at time of his death, that it was racism and the disproportionate dumping of toxic chemicals that had led to the health problems that were killing black people and potentially and actively killing young black kids and babies because of the high levels of toxins. He won this case. The only issue was, it was maybe, I want to say, I can't remember the exact number of how much money. It was 60 million or something, 6 million, whatever the case was. But in order to pay that out to all the residents, it wasn't that much per person. And then he got the government to say, we'll have a legal clinic, so on and so forth, to deal with the ramifications, which is a form of reparations. Ramifications of the environment on these citizens in Anniston, Alabama. Johnny Cochran won that case shortly thereafter he passed. And he was very beloved and appreciated for his work in winning the case. And then, like it has been consistently in American history, they find ways around it. So then the clinic, they had it for a few years. Then they stopped funding it as much. And those black people who got those payouts, spent it trying to, pay for the health care they didn't have. It's not just easy to get up and move when you're impoverished. Okay? When you don't have another way to make money. Lack of education. But that still shouldn't mean the end of your life. And this is why I say education it should not be a privilege. It is in this country. It should be a right. But if it is, then that would change the whole game. And I could go on and on about this book, but and this book is thorough. This black woman, Harriet Washington, her work is so incredibly impressive. Her name should be well known, and that's why I'm making this video. Because I think a lot of us could learn from her kind of research. And let me tell you, she has the whole end section of the book about how to report these sort of things, how it's not over, how, just because we have this kind of narrative in this country about civil rights, and she talks about how many civil rights leaders were hated, even in the face of murders, they kept going, so on and so forth. And she makes the point that it doesn't have to be over. We just have to keep pushing. Activists have to keep doing this. And she brings up all these various cases, particularly of black people, African Americans in rural areas, who were active in fighting for environmental rights and justice. This isn't like, the white student at Berkeley with dreadlocks locking themselves to a tree. And that had been my image for so long. But black communities, and one, Afton, North Carolina, and the reason why it struck me, because it was in Warren County where my grandparents were from, a small sharecropping area. And in 1982, they came together about people dumping toxins. And there were still white government leaders who allowed this, who continued, and they were pushing back. So what empowers me when reading even tough history combined with science like this is that we have so many examples of people resisting. All right? Let our motto be resistance. And that is something that will always stick with me, and what I try to teach in history. You can't always guarantee it, okay? The bottom line is, when you're black, you just have to, there's going to be some tragedies and some fucked up shit. But let our motto be resistance. Who said that? Henry Highland Garnett. Do your Black History Look Up today. But anyway, so this is part of my Free Black Women's Library Challenge. This is book number 7. I still have to make 25. So, yeah, and like I said, these read 25 books written by black women and or black non-binary writers by December 31st, 2023. And, summertime is my hefty time. I'm preparing, for the next school year, but also have time to read things I enjoy. So anyway, just want to bring this to you. Happy Juneteenth. Have a great week. I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.